All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin a good Chodesh. I apologize. I don't have the current sponsorship information, so my apologies. I do have that our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan are Azriel and Iris Miller, in honor of the holy soldiers of the IDF and the schus of the ongoing strength and endurance of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Al Talmud Torah Meretz Hashem should be a schus for all of them, and Halavai should pave the way for Shalom B'Karov. All right, with that, let us apologize again. We'll post the sponsorship information a little bit later on the chat once I have it. But with that, we'll have to begin. So today's daf is Samech Dalid, 64. 64, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Samech Gimel Amud Beis. We left off Iboy Lehu Ma'u Liskol Al Yado. Actually, we made good ground yesterday. So we are picking up. This is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 lines up from the bottom. So if remember again, we've been with a very interesting Mishnah where the father said, I was Mekadesh my daughter, I don't know to whom I was Mekadesh her. And then we had a variety of different variations of that case. So here's the Shaila. In this case, I will say, where the father comes along and says, I know I was Mekadesh my daughter, and ultimately again, I don't know to whom it was. The Gemara asks, Ma'u liskol al yado. So if someone, let's say again, here, look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Ma'u liskol al yado, shala'av kilomer al piv, im amr kidash yezbiti, ve'edei kiddushin ein ba'in lefaninu, v'zinsa, ma'u lahachsik al piv kedinara muras l'sokla. So we'll say, here's the shayla. So ultimately again, do we go ahead and say that the father's testimony that he went ahead and was Mekadesh's daughter is enough to go ahead and create liability for a death penalty? So someone were to have relations with this girl who's not her husband, would that be called the case of Nara Murasa and generate capital punishment? So Rav Amar in Soklin, Rav says, no, we do not administer skila. In other words, the father's testimony is enough to impact her status, but it is not enough ultimately again to actually generate capital punishment liability for someone else. Ravasi Amar of Soklim. Ravasi says, no, we would even go ahead and give skila based on the father's testimony. So Rav Amar in Soklim, Rav said we don't give skila. Kol hemeni rachmana, sorry, ki hemeni rachmana la'av lisura liktol lohemni. So we'll say, so Rav says, no, when the Torah believes the father, right, we're going to see the Torah vests the father with the credibility to say that he married off his daughter. What is that? What's the extent of that credibility? To say that she's married, to impact her status, but not to generate a capital liability for someone else. Ravasi says ultimately again, it's enough to generate an obligation of skila. L'kula milse hemei rach la'av. Ultimately again, the Torah believes the father for all matters. In other words, it's not just status, but it believes him ultimately again to generate capital liability as well. So Amar Ravasi says, Umodina, I would agree that ultimately again there is no skila, but omeres niskadashti. So we'll say, so this machlokes ultimately again is only when it's the father claiming that he was Mekadesh the daughter. But Ravasi says that halacha l'maisa. Welcome back, Dr. Milner. Baruch haba. Right? But ultimately again, Ravasi says that halacha l'maisa, I would agree in a case where she says, ultimately I accepted Kiddushin, but again, I don't know to whom, She'in Soklin, that ultimately, again, that does not generate a skila liability. Now, why distinction between she says it and he says it? Look at Rashi, 3 lines up from before Rashi gets wide. Pamer says Kadashi, V'zinsa achakim, She'in Soklin o alpia, v'apavi shechzika asma kodem as dos bechazkas arusa, v'tayim farashaza. So we'll see why. So we'll say, so just pause here for just a second. Here's what we have. We know from our Mishnah that a father is believed to say, I was Mekadesh my daughter. Right? The truth is we haven't established exactly why that's so. We'll talk about this actually at the end of this sugya. But Lamaisa, that's what we have established. That a father has the credibility to go ahead and do that. Now our machlokes is, right now our machlokes, by the way, it's more than that. Even he could even say I was a Chajj and I don't even remember to who it was. Right? That's the extent of the father's credibility. The machlokes now is, What is the extent of that credibility? Is that enough to generate capital liability? So if this girl has relations with someone, let's say for sure who the father knows was not the guy, right? So does that create adultery? Like, is that nara murasa? Is that skila? Or no, it can impact her status, but cannot go ahead and generate capital liability. So that's machlokes. Rav says only status, no capital punishment. Ravasi says even capital punishment. But everyone agrees that this is only, in other words, machlokes. Ravasi saying capital punishment only when it's the father who's claiming that he was Makadish daughter. But if the daughter claims I was Makadish myself, but I don't know to whom, everyone would agree no capital liability in that case. Okay, so let's analyze. Ravasi says, I agree, but I'm sorry, so we did the fine. Ravasi, Hanish Sadidi, Mirafsan Igri. I know that my statements are enough to smash through roofs. In other words, that my statements are a little bit difficult to swallow. After all, again, Hashta, Uma b'makum shimba lichnos kones. In a situation, ultimately, again, where we would allow, ultimately, the man who comes along and says, I'm the husband to marry her, Omrat Soklim, we say that generates skila liability. I will say there first the case where the father says that I was Mekadosh my daughter to someone, I don't remember who. A guy comes along and says it was me, that we believe him. That would generate skila liability. Makom shimbalichnos in kones in odinsha soklin. So then we'll say in a case where we don't know, right, where we wouldn't believe who the suitor was, i.e. when she says I was Mekadosh to myself to someone, but I don't remember her, certainly there should be skila liability. Velohi, Rav says it's not true. Lav hemnei rachmana l'dideh lo hamner. So we'll say, here's a distinction. Only a father is vested with the credibility to say I was Mekadosh my daughter to someone. The girl herself is not. And I'm using the notion girl. Because remember, who are we talking about over here? We're talking about over here. A nara, right? Remember again, a Bogeres would be a different parsha. So the idea over here is the Torah only vests the father with the credibility to ultimately say that halacha l'maisa, I gave my daughter over in marriage. Rav Chisda Amar echad zeh v'echad zeh soklin. Rav Chisda says, so we'll say, we're still with our machlokes. Same machlokes, Ravasi and Rav. When a father says, was Mekadosh my daughter, so we know from a status perspective, everyone agrees that ultimately, again, she has the din of a mikudeshes. She is betrothed. Question is it just status, or can it literally generate capital liability as well? Rav says, no skila. Ravasi says, yes, skila. But everyone agrees that this only applies in a case where it's the father himself making the statement. If it's the nara who's making the statement, she is not vested with that level of credibility to generate capital liability. Good. Rav Chisda Gemara says as follows. Rav Chisda Amar, Rav Chisda said, fine. So Rav Chisda, there's more to talk about. Fine. Rav Chisda Amar, echad zeh v'echad zeh in soklin. Rav Chisda said, no. Whether it's the father impacting her status or the girl impacting her own status, this only impacts status. It cannot create skila liability. Vaz Rav Chisda tameh. Sorry, Rav Chisda goes according to his reasoning. What's Rav Chisda's logic? Don't Rav Chisda. B'ni zed. Rav Chisda brings down another case. So my son, ben teisha shana v'yom echad, biti zu bas gimel shana v'yom echad. So let's imagine the following situation. A man has children. Now remember, we know that halacha l'maisa, the bia of a child only becomes halachically recognized as of a certain age. For a boy, it is the age of 9 years old in one day. For a girl, it's the age of 3 years old in one day. It's difficult for us, especially for a girl, to wrap our heads around these ages, but we'll just take them as just statements of fact for now. So as I said, the idea over here is like this. Let's say a father has children, and we don't know the age of the children. We don't know the age of the children. Hey, so what happens? The father says, my son is 9 years old in one day, or my daughter is 3 years old in one day. So what's the halacha? Ne'eman lekarban avalo lemakas v'lo la'onshin. The father is believed vis-a-vis carbonic liability, but not vis-a-vis makas, right, lashes, or any other type of punishment. Now, what does this mean? We're talking about over here where, let's say someone who is an erva to the boy had relations with him. Now, if the boy is below the age of 9 years old in one day, then the bia of a boy less than 9 years old in one day is not a recognized act of bia. In which case, there's no arayas. But if he's older than 9 years old in one day, so obviously there's no liability for the boy is a child, but there will be liability for the adult participant in the erva, in the arayas relationship. So the case we're dealing with over here is, let's say we don't know how old the kid is. I don't know how the kid is. The only testimony we have about the age of the kid is the testimony of the father. So the father says, my son is 9 years old in one day. The boy just had relations with a woman who's an erva to him. So I say, so the shaila is, can we generate capital liability for the woman or not? Right? For the adult participant in the act of arayas. So Rav Chisda comes along and says, at most, the testimony of the father will generate carbonic liability, but does not go ahead and generate punishment liability. So whether for malchus or for misa or for anything else. So the Gemara says, "Tanya kavas der Rav Chisda advice says to Rav Chisda, Benizeh ben Yom Shana, V'yamecha, my son is 13 years old in one day. Biti zu basir beishan of Yom Echad, top of Samach Talid." Ne'eman l'nedarim u'lecharamim u'lehekdeshos u'le'erkin. So Rabbi says, so that father's testimony will be believed for things like a neder, a cherem, which is another type of neder, hekdish purposes, erech vow purposes, avalo l'makos u'le'onshin, but not ultimately again for makas and for onshin. Rabbi say, this is at the end of the day how we paskin. Whenever we have these kind of cases where status is being determined by the statement of an individual, one individual, even though that individual is the father, who is vested with an awesome amount of authority when it comes to the relationship specifically of his daughter, halacha l'maisa, he is believed for status, not believed for liability. So halacha l'maisa, we paskin like Rav, namely again I will say, so if someone were to have relations with this girl who the father claimed he betrothed to someone, and let's say the father says, I know for sure that's not the guy I betrothed my daughter to, so l'maisa, that could generate, well, it would not generate capital liability. We would not administer skila based on that. I will say, and again, this is how the Rambam paskins. The Rambam goes through all of these cases just very quickly in Hilchos Ishos. So the Rambam says that halacha l'maisa, first halacha is, remember, let's just go through this quickly. Father says, I was mekadesh my daughter to someone. I don't remember who I was mekadesh her to. So I will say, at the end of the day, the Rambam paskins that halacha l'maisa, the girl remains asura to everyone, right? Because we don't know who her husband is, right? Until the father says, I know who I was mekadesh my daughter to. That's case one. Case two, someone steps forward and says, I am the guy who you are mekadesh your daughter to. So the Rambam says, Ne'eman, i'af lichnos. So let's remember again, so the Rambam Paskins ultimately again, like Rav Asi, namely that when the guy steps forward and says, I'm the one, he is believed. And he's believed even to live with her as her husband. In other words, he's believed totally to say that he is the guy. If two people show up and say, I was the one who was the Kadisher, I was the one who was the Kadisher, so what's the halacha? Both of them give her a get and she moves on with her life. Alternatively, what could happen is that halacha l'maisa, one of them gives her a get and one of them marries her. Case number 4, if the woman says, I accepted Kiddushin from someone, but I don't remember who, and someone comes along and says, it was me, in that case, remember again, we can allow that man to give her a get so she could move on with her life, but we do not allow them to live together as husband and wife. The concern is what? Remember again, the concern is that maybe he's not being truthful and she's just going along with it because halacha l'maisa, she's embarrassed that she doesn't remember who she accepted Kiddushin from. So we'll say, that's all the halacha l'maisa from the previous sugya. And lastly, again, our last piece over here, namely Rav, that halacha l'maisa, even though we accept the testimony of the father, we would not administer capital punishment based on it. Beautiful. We'll say, let's go weiter. Says the Mishnah. Mishnah top of Samach Daled. Kidash dis biti. I was mekadesh my daughter, meaning, we'll say, obviously, it doesn't mean I was a mekadesh daughter. I accepted Kiddushin on behalf of my daughter, right? V'girashtia kishikitana. I accepted Kiddushin, and I accepted the get of my minor daughter. All while she was a kitana. V'harihi kitana, and she's still a kitana now, while he's giving this testimony. Ne'aman, he is believed. Kidashtia v'girashtia kishikitana. V'harihi gidola. Conversely, if he says, listen, I accepted Kiddushin for my daughter when she was a kitana, and I accepted her get while she was a kitana. And now, when is the father giving this testimony? When she's an adult woman. She's a gedola. In that case, Eino Ne'aman. He is not believed. So we'll say, interesting. So if he claims, I accepted Kiddushin on her behalf, and I accepted her get on her behalf, when she was a Ketana, and he gives this testimony while she is still a Ketana, he is believed. If he gives that very same testimony, but she is already a Gedola, an adult, he is not believed. Nishmas. Listen to this. Let's say he claims, my daughter was taken captive, upedisia, and I redeemed her. Bein shehi kitana, bein shehi gedola eno ne'aman. Whether she is a child or whether she is an adult, ultimately, again, he is not ne'aman. The Rebbe said, now, what's the chap of that? What's the chap? So the idea over here is, remember, if he testifies that she was taken captive, so the halacha understands that we take it as a fact that a captive is violated by their captor. So what that testimony does is renders her unfit to go ahead and marry into the kahuna. So the Gemara is essentially saying is the father does not have credibility to make that statement. Now, obviously, all of these are talking about cases where we have no independent corroboration of these facts through other witnesses, right? All we have is the father's statement. So three different cases in the Mishnah. First case is where the father is believed. Cases number 2 and 3, the father is not believed. So Maishna Reishno, Maishna Seifa. Why is it that the father is believed in case number 1? So let's remember again, case number 1 is the father is saying, I married off my daughter while she was a Ketana. I accepted her divorce while she is a Ketana. Ultimately, he's believed. What's the pshat? So the Gemara says, here we go. Seifa, lav biyadei. So the Gemara says, Seifa, very simple. When testifying that she's a Ketana, right? When he testifies that I married her off and I accepted her get while she was a Ketana, and she's still a Ketana, since she's still a Ketana, the father has rights over her. So we feel comfortable believing him when he still has shlita, when he still has some level of dominion over his daughter. In the Seifa case of Bosai, she's already a Gedola. Right? Seifa means cases number 2 and 3, case number 2, right? She's a Gedola already. So, right? He's claiming my daughter who's now an adult woman when she was a minor, so ultimately, again, I married her off and I accepted her get. She's an adult woman already. He has no shlita over her. So apparently that's the distinction. So the Gemara says, Velo, so we'll say, so the idea seems to be as follows. So the idea seems to be that halacha l'maisa, if he testifies when she's a Ketana that he married her off and he accepted her get. Remember, we'll say, what's the impact of saying that he married her off and he accepted her get? She's a grusha. As a grusha, she can't marry a Kohen. So what he's doing is his testimony is impacting her status. So what the Gemara seems to say is a father is believed to impact her status when she's a Ketana, but not believed to impact her status when she's a Gedola. But the Gemara says a father always has the ability to impact her status. After all, father has the ability to marry off his daughter to a chalal. Notice, right, a chalal is the offspring of a forbidden kohanic union. Let's say a Kohen marries a convert, or a Kohen marries a grusha, divorcee. So the offspring of that union is called the chalal. So a father has the ability to go out and marry off his daughter to a chalal, in which case, again, he's impacting her status. Halo kasha kabidostai ben Yehuda. Da'amar ben Osi Yisrael mikvatara lechalalin. So I'll say, no, maybe the Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Dostai ben Yehuda, who holds that actually, again, a girl is allowed to marry a chalal, and in fact, again, there's a beauty when a girl marries a chalal, and that it purifies the offspring. But the father could always marry off his daughter to a mamzer. Many fathers feel that they've married off their daughter to a mamzer, right? But this is talking about a status mamzer, right? Not a behavioral one. So we'll say, Solamaisa, the Gemara says over here, mamzer. So we'll say, so the point the Gemara is making over here is what? The point the Gemara is making is that a father always has the ability to impact his daughter's status, because technically speaking, he can marry off these girls. He can marry off these girls ultimately, again, to people who impact their status. So, for example, a father can marry off his daughter to a mamzer, and I will say again, that literally impacts her status and the status of the offspring. Rabbi Akiva, Damar in Kiddushin Tovsin b'Chayvei Lav. No, our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva holds. I will say, remember again, this is the dramatic sheet of Rabbi Akiva that I think we probably were first introduced to in Yevamos. I think it was the first time. So Rabbi Akiva has this wildly stringent position that Kiddushin doesn't take effect in any prohibited scenario. See, even if you have a relationship, quote unquote, only punishable by a lav, by a prohibition, Kiddushin doesn't take effect. So therefore, our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Akiva, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, Kiddushin doesn't take effect with Chayvei Lavin. But a father has the ability to go ahead and marry off his daughter. Let's say she's an Almon Rabba, so she was a Ketana, right as a Ketana, her husband died. Father can marry off to a Kohen Gadol, which again would impact her status. Rabbi Simai, Omer Minakol Os Rabbi Akiva Mamzer, Chutz Me'almana LeKohen Gadol. So Rabbi Akiva would go ahead and literally say that any forbidding union, this is dramatic. We don't paskin this way, obviously, because Klal Yisrael would be a mess if we paskin this way. But Lamaisa, Rabbi Akiva holds that halacha Lamaisa, every union produces mamzerim, except for Amana to a Kohen Gadol. Shari Amra Torah lo yikach v'lo yichalel. Pasuk says, ultimately, again, he cannot take her in marriage and cannot profane. Chilulim osa, vein osa mamzerim. Ultimately, again, marriage of an Amana to a Kohen Gadol creates chalalos. Right? It creates a chalal, but doesn't create mamzer. Rabbi says, Rabbi Shavev, Damar Bo Nitzavech Al Akiva ben Yosef, Shayos Shahaya Omer Kol Shein Bia B'Yisrael Havlad Mamzer. So Hani Yichal Rabbi Shavev, Ila Tamid Dinav Shei Shapir. So we'll say, it makes this clear Rabbi Shavev. Rabbi Shavev is espousing his own ideology. But at the end of the day, if he's just coming to exclude the position of Rabbi Simai, first part line of both, a father could always go ahead and still marry off his daughter to people who are prohibited not through a prohibition, but through an asay. So I will say, the point the Gemara is making over here is, you want a taina that a father is not permitted to say, right, when his daughter is a gedon, his daughter is an adult, he's not believed to say, I married off my daughter, and I accepted her get. Why isn't he believed to say that? Because it impacts her status. But a father is always believed to impact his daughter's status, because he could technically marry her off to someone who impacts her status. So a father has that credibility. So the Gemara says, Amar Ravashi, v'tizbara, reisha mishum debiyadahu. So we'll say, is that the reason? So in other words, let's take a step back. Let's go back to case number one. What's case number one? Father says, I married off my daughter when she was a Ketana, and I accepted her get when she's a Ketana, and she's still a Ketana. She's still a Ketana. So what did the Mishnah say? Father is believed. Father is believed. So now this girl has the status of a Gerusha, and father is believed to make that statement. So the Gemara's Ravashi comes along and says, one second. Is the reason because it's biyad? And what's the reason he's believed? We wanted to say the reason he's believed is because since he could technically still marry her off to whoever he wants, therefore he is believed to impact her status. So the Gemara says, is that the reason he's believed? So the Gemara said, Nehi de biyadol lekadsha, biyadol legarsha. After the Gemara will say, even if you want a taina, that the father has the right to marry her off, does the father control the process of her getting divorced? That's not up to him. That's up to her husband. Va'od. Furthermore, again, afilu amar haydelo necha begava mi matzi mekachi nehile ba'karche. He'll say, furthermore, again, the father doesn't really have control over her kiddushin as well. He'll say, who has control over the kiddushin? The husband. In other words, the father can't go over to a guy and say, listen, you need to marry my daughter. So I will say, the truth is the father doesn't really have control over either of these processes. You wanted to say the whole reason why the father is believed in case number one was because he controls the process. But in reality, he doesn't control the process. He doesn't control the process. Ravashi says, Reisha Rachmana Hemene Krafuna. So let's see, here we go. Comes along Ravashi, and Ravashi says, in reality, when it comes to the first case, the reason why the father has credibility was because of Rav Huna. Rav Huna Amarav, Minayin La'av Shene'eman Le'esar Spita Minatora. Both say, from where do we know that a father has the right? Both says, this actually reflects back on the previous sugya as well, because it's the same dynamic, right? In all of these cases, the father is believed to impact his daughter's status. Where do we know that from? Where do we know that a father is believed to impact his daughter's status? Shnei Amar, both say, here it is, underline this. Shnei Amar, as biti nasati la'ish hazeh. Torah says that a father is believed to say, I've given my daughter over in marriage to this man. So that's actually fascinating. So listen to this. Le'ish asra. Now I will say, it's fascinating. The way to darshan this pasuk is like this. As biti nasati le'ish. As biti, now I will say, now this, by the way, just to give you the context here is actually talking about the case of a father who marries off his daughter, and then the husband fraudulently claims that the girl, the wife, wasn't a besula. So that's the context. But again, context isn't really relevant for us right now. What's relevant for us is the pasuk. So the father comes along and says, "Is biti nasati la isha zeh? I've given my daughter over to this man." So the Gemara also listens to how the Gemara darshans it. The Gemara says, "Leish asra." We're kind of going to split out the pasuk. Es biti nasati leish. When a man says, "I've given my daughter over to marriage in a man," right? Now, what does that do? Asra. That asers her to everyone. Hazeh hitira b'nisuin. So ultimately, again, hazeh permits her ultimately again to be married to this man and prohibits her to everyone else. Hemini rachman ala'av. B'nisuin hemini rachman ala'av b'shvil hemini. Suppose like this is it. And this is the pasuk. So as biti nasati la isha zeh, I have given my daughter in marriage to this man. That is the pasuk which vests the father with the credibility to go ahead and tell us his daughter's status. So this is the key to understanding the previous sugya as well. So the father comes along and says, I always mekadesh my daughter to someone, but I don't remember who. Her status is impacted. And in this case as well, when the father comes along and says, I married off my daughter and I accepted her get. Because remember again, Kiddushin and Kiddushin or Gittin are two sides of the same coin. So he is vested with that credibility. But I will say, however, the credibility of a father only extends over marriage. What doesn't it extend to? Captivity. So if a father says, my daughter was taken captive and she was redeemed, do you have independent corroboration of that fact? If you have eidos, fine. Then of course, eidos is eidos. But if it's just your word, as strong as the word of a father is when it comes to marital issues, it bears no weight when it comes to captivity. So we'll say, so that's the halacha. So therefore, again, remember, but the father's word is also only going to work when he has the right to give his daughter over in marriage. When he no longer has the right to give her over in marriage, therefore his word is meaningless. Therefore, I will say, so that's now the whole Mishnah makes sense. So in case number one, what's happening in case number one? Case number one is the father says, I gave my daughter over in marriage and I accepted her get on her behalf. When is he making the statement? When he's making the statement? When she's a katana. Okay, so you have power over her marriage when she's a katana, therefore you have credibility. Case number two, I gave my daughter over in marriage and I accepted her get, and when is he saying this? When she's an adult. She's an adult. You have no control over, right? You have no credibility, not control. You have no credibility over her marital issues when she is an adult, therefore your word is meaningless. Case number three, my daughter was taken captive and redeemed, so we'll say, so that, you have no credibility at all, right? The Torah didn't invest you with credibility when it comes to captivity, only when it comes to marriage, and therefore the father's word is not believed. Incredible. Mishnah. Misha Amar, listen to this. Misha Amar B'Shas Misaso, it's actually a very interesting case. Misha Amar B'Shas Misaso, Yeshli Banim. This is an interesting one, right? So Reuben's on his deathbed, right? Reuben wants to leave Olam Hazeh with a clean conscience, so apparently he tells his wife, by the way, I have kids. Of course, the follow-up question to that is, with who, right? But Lamaisa, no, actually, really what's talking about over here is he's saying over here that halacha Lamaisa, remember again, he's saying over here, he and his wife, right? So Reuben is married to Rachel, right? So remember again, I will say, Yibum is generated, or the obligation of Yibum is generated when the man dies without children. If a man has children, even if it's from what? A different marriage, halacha Lamaisa, there's no din of Yibum. Right? So let's say again, what happens over here? So Misha Omer B'Shas Misaso. So a man says to his wife, at the time of his death, or a man makes a declaration, at the time of his death, Yeshli Banim, I have sons. And therefore by making that statement, his wife is no longer obligated in Yibum upon his death. Look at Rashi, Yeshli Banim, Vein Ishto Zekuka Liyavam. That's the point over here. So he's supposed to say, we never knew he had kids before. Now there's a deathbed revelation that he has kids. Ultimately, again, he is believed and his wife is freed from the Yibum obligation. Yeshli Achim, now watch this. Let's say on his deathbed, he discloses, I have brothers. Now, we never knew he had brothers before, right? As far as we knew, he was an only son. Now on his deathbed, he makes a declaration that he has brothers. Eino ne'eman. To that, he is not believed. Shabbos say, interestingly enough, it makes it sound like he is believed to free his wife from Yibum. He is not believed to obligate his wife in Yibum. So the Gemara says, Amma, Nema lahative, Nema lasar. So you see from here that the husband is believed to go ahead and permit his wife, i.e. free her from the obligation of Yibum, but not obligate her. Nema masisin look Rabbi Nassan. Our Mishnah must not reflect the view of Rabbi Nassan. Why? The Sanya, B'shas Kiddushin, if at the time they got married, Amar, Yeshli Banim. Right, time to get married. So Reuben's marrying Rachel, and Reuben says to Rachel, again, I believe in honesty. I just want you to know, I have children. I'm entering into this marriage, and I have children already. Okay. And B'shas Misa, Amar in Labanim. And then when he dies, he's on his deathbed, he says, you know what? I lied. I didn't have kids. Right? Or, again, B'shas Kiddushin, Amar lo ein lo achim. At the time of the marriage, Reuben said to Rachel, I don't have any brothers. B'shas Misa, Amar lo yesh li achim. Then at the time of his death, he said, do I have brothers? So what's halacha? Neman lahativ, neman la'esra, divrei Rabbi. So we'll say Rabbi holds halacha in general. When a husband's giving new information, he is believed to free his wife from Yibum. He is not believed to disclose new information which obligates her in Yibum. Rabbi Nassan says, no, not true. Af ne'eman le'asar. Rabbi Nassan essentially says that Allah Chalamaysa, he is believed in all cases with to reveal new information, even if what? Even if Allah Chalamaysa, it results in now her being obligated in Yibum. Amar Rabba. So the Gemara is just suggesting our Mishnah clearly doesn't reflect the view of Rabbi Nassan. Because Rabbi Nassan apparently holds that Allah Chalamaysa, husband is believed to go ahead and reveal new information, even if it obligates the wife in Yibum. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Rava says like this, Shani Hasam, Kevan de B'shas Misa Kahaderbe, Ema Kushtakama. Rava says, no, it's different. Deathbed revelations are different. Why? Because Rava says, we assume that people don't lie on their deathbed. Rava says, it's interesting. Which kind of, if you extend that, what else do we assume? That people do lie. Right? At other times. Others will say, people say things for all kinds of reasons throughout life. But at death, when a person is facing death, it just doesn't seem to be that a person has to live with any kind of illusions. So therefore, again, they're going to be telling the truth. Amalei Abai says, V'lav kol dechenu. Rabbi says, all the more so. Hashta, Uma Hasam, the Kamar Lele Diburi, Amrit Kushta Kamar. So Rabbi says, I don't understand. I will say, what's there in the case of the Brisa and the case of the Mishnah? And now, in the Brisa case, the guy's lying. Right? The guy said one thing, and then he says, I'm saying something else. And yet, we're believing him. Masnisin delo Kamar Lele Diburi, the Koshkin. What's in the case of the Mishnah? Remember again. What's in the case of the Mishnah? Is Reuven lying? Is Reuven lying? No. Rather, again, in the case of the Mishnah, this whole time we never thought Reuven had kids. And now ultimately, again, remember again, he's saying, I have kids. So if in the case of the Brisa, where he's literally lying, we say, you know what, a deathbed declaration should be taken seriously, then why in the case of the Mishnah where he's not even lying? We just kind of made assumptions his entire lifetime, and now on his deathbed he's changing those assumptions. Shouldn't we believe him? The Mishnah's case, we'll say, is where we had no chazaka that he had brothers and no chazaka that he had kids. So we'll say, therefore, again, since he had a chazaka that he didn't have sons, he didn't have brothers, if he says, I have sons, he's believed. But if he says, I have brothers, he's not believed. Why? Lav kol kamine de asli akule alma. So we'll say, this is interesting. In other words, if you want to change chazaka, you are believed to change chazaka. As long as what? That change in chazaka only impacts you. The moment that change in chazaka impacts someone else, why should we believe you? In other words, we'll say, it's just, remember, what is chazaka? We've learned this many times before. What is chazaka? Chazaka creates a presumption, creates a legal reality. If you want to change chazaka, there's a mechanism to change chazaka. Now, if you want to change a chazaka that only impacts you, so Reuben's on his deathbed, he says, I have to tell you, I have children. We say, okay, mazel tov, you know, I don't know, well, fine, good for you. Why? Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, right? But Lamaisa, you want to say that you have brothers. You want to say you have brothers. So now, again, halacha Lamaisa, now your statement is triggering something that could dramatically impact someone else. So that chazak, we're not going to allow you to simply change it. I'll say, it's a tremendous yisod in life in general about, we'll get to this afterwards. Brisa, what's the case of the Brisa? Amud Beis. Brisa, the muchsak lan ba'achi, or the muchsak lan bebani. The Brisa's case, I will say, is where we had a presumption that he had brothers. but he didn't have presumption that he had sons. So Rabbi says, so now remember again, in the case where there was a chazaka that he had brothers but not sons, so then Rabbi say, what does that do? That already makes her subject to Yibum. So in other words, the chazaka case was that, so in other words, in the Mishnah's case, the chazaka case is that ultimately, again, she wasn't eligible for Yibum, right? So Lamaisa, so you want to change around chazakas, that's fine as long as you don't make her eligible for Yibum. In the Brisa case, the chazaka was he had brothers and he didn't have sons, which means the chazaka was she was eligible for Yibum. Damiran ma li l'shaker. Because we'll say in that case over here, therefore, when he comes along and he says, right, he says that ultimately, again, on his deathbed, that I have sons, so we say mali l'shaker. We'll say mali l'shaker is actually a halachic concept that says, why should he lie? Now we'll say mali l'shaker means when a person makes a statement that he didn't need to make. So that kind of proves the veracity of the statement. Because we'll say in general, why do people lie? Why do people lie? When they want something, when they need something. There's a constant halacha of ein adam chotei v'lo lo. People sin when they benefit from it. They don't sin when there's no benefit. So saying that people lie when there's a benefit from it. If there's no benefit from lying, then why do they need to do it? So Gemara says, "Mali l'shaker." So Gemara says, "My commerce." So we'll say, so when a guy's on his deathbed, so remember, in case of the Brisa, there's chazaka that he has brothers, chazaka that he doesn't have sons. So his wife is eligible for Yibum. Now on the deathbed he says, I have sons. So what's the halacha? We believe him. Why do we believe him? Why should he lie? And we're saying, no, what do you mean, why should he lie? You know why he's introducing sons to the equation? So why is he introducing sons? He doesn't want his wife to be eligible for Yibum. So Gemara says, my car lived here in Yavam, Masi Amar Patron Lebegita. So I say, if he wants to exempt his wife from Yibum, there's a much better way to do that than inventing a whole new family, right? Which is what? Give her a get. Remember, you will say a husband could give a woman a get that is triggered retroactively a moment before his death. That is the easiest mechanism to circumvent Yibum. You do not have to invent the family. So when a guy is going to go ahead and say, I have kids on my deathbed, so I will say, so we believe him. Because again, if it was just about exempting her from Yibum, there's a much easier mechanism. Rabbi Savar, Mali l'shaker ki edim dami. So Rabbi holds that halacha l'maisa, the concept of Mali l'shaker, why should a person lie, that is as powerful as Eidos itself. Va'asu edim akri chazaka. Therefore, the edim come along, so to speak, and uproot the chazaka. Rabbi Nassan holds Mali l'shaker ki chazaka dami. Rabbi Nassan holds whenever we say Mali l'shaker, that's like a chazaka. La'asi chazaka va'akra chazaka lagamre. So we'll say ultimately again, one chazaka doesn't really have the ability to go ahead and uproot another chazaka. So we'll say, so that just happened to be in general. So here's what's fascinating about this. So everyone is subscribing to the concept of Mali l'shaker, right? That so in other words, when a person says something, and we say to ourselves like, okay, I never do that before, but why would he lie? In other words, there's no benefit in him lying. So interestingly enough, that adds a level of veracity to his statement. The shaila is, how much? This is fascinating, how much? So one opinion says, Mali l'shaker is like eidos. Suddenly it's like testimony. That statement is as powerful as testimony. Other opinion says, no. Mali l'shaker is not as powerful as eidos. What it's as powerful of, it is as powerful as chazaka. So I'll say, so what do we do with this case? So I'll just point out over here, ultimately, again, the way the Rambam Paskins is Ha'omer, this is in Hilchos Yibum v'Chalitza, actually. Parak Gimel Halacha Aleph. Ha'omer zebini, Oshamer Yeshli Banim, Hareze Ne'amanu Polteres Ishtom and Echalitza Yibum. So the halacha is, if a man claims, now the Mishnah framed it as on his deathbed, because obviously that's when Yibum is triggered. If a man says on his deathbed, or at that matter for any other time in life, I have a son, or I have children, he is believed to exempt his wife from Yibum. He is believed. Similarly, if he says, Amar Ze Achi, O Amar Yeshli Achin, Eino ne'eman le'esores ishto la'anicha zekuka liyavam sherzam skalas. So what says Salach l'maisa the Rambam Paskins is a man is believed to say I have children, exempting his wife from Yibum. A man is not believed to say I have brothers, thereby obligating his wife in Yibum. So Rabbi says, so obviously these cases are talking about, we had no idea that Reuven has kids. Reuven comes along on his deathbed or some other time and says, I have kids. So he's believed to exempt his wife from Yibum. As far as we know, Reuven had no brothers. He comes along and says, I have a brother. We do not believe him to obligate his wife on Yibum. Incredible. Well, obviously, I'm giving you the shorthand halacha, but that's the takeaway. Mishnah, Hamakadish is Bito Stam. So listen to this. We actually had this case before. We've learned this case. So watch this. Reuven has, we're going to see, the case actually is going to be, is Reuven has a number of daughters. He goes, right, he is Mekadesh's daughter. Right? Only one little issue, which is, he did not indicate which one. Right? So, Mekadesh is Bito Stam, Eina Bogros Bichlal. So, we'll say, first of all, assuming over here that Reuven has adult daughters and minor daughters. I don't mean like minor daughters, like secondary daughters, but like minors of age. Right? So, adult daughters and minor daughters. He was Mekadesh, a daughter, he did not indicate which one. So, what's the halacha? So, first of all, the Bogros, the adult daughters, are out. Right? Because again, remember, Reuven as the father doesn't have the right to be Mekadesh's Bulgara's daughter. So that's case number one. So the Bogros are out. Next case. Let's say Reuven is married to two women, Rachel and Leah. He has daughters from each of those women. Let's just call it two daughters from Rachel, two daughters from Leah. So what happens? Reuven goes out. He accepts Kiddushin. Now, he doesn't remember for who, but all he remembers is he did it for his oldest daughter. My oldest daughter. Now, what's the shayla? The Iniyodea, only thing is I don't remember, in Gidolos Shebigdolos, is it the oldest of the four girls? Is it the oldest of the four girls? Oh, Gidolos Shebigtanos. I will say maybe ultimately, again, the oldest of the younger set of daughters. Oh, Kitana Shebigdolos. Or maybe it's daughter number 2 of my first set of daughters, who is older than the second daughter. So just to frame the case properly, Reuven is married to two women, Rachel and Leah. He first has 2 daughters from Rachel and then 2 daughters from Leah. He comes along and he says, I accepted Kiddushin for my oldest daughter. So now the Gemara says, we don't know what oldest means. Does oldest mean oldest of the 4 girls? Does oldest mean oldest of the second 2, of Leah's 2 kids? Right? Does oldest mean the youngest of the first 2 who is still older than the younger 2? So the Gemara says, So what's the halacha? Okay, kulan asuros. So the truth is all 4 are going to be prohibited. All 4, chutz minak tana shebiktanos remer. So we'll say the exception is the one girl who is fine is who? The youngest of the young. So literally the biologically youngest daughter number 4. Daughter number 4, because they're both say, what's the suffix? The suffix over here is all of them technically, the first 3 of the 4 daughters could all be called technically a gidola, right? Daughter number 1 is the oldest. Daughter number 2 is older than the younger 2, right? Daughter number 3 is older than her younger sister. So all of them could be called gidola. The only one who can't be called gidola ultimately is the youngest. So therefore, again, all the first oldest 3 are asuros. The youngest one is not. So the Gemara says the youngest one is fine. So kidash nespiti v'niyodea im kitana shebigtanos im kitana shebigdol. So we'll say same case. Reuven says I was mekadesh my youngest daughter. So okay, now we don't know who's the youngest. Right? Kitana shebigtanos, is it the youngest daughter number 4? Kitana shebigdolos, or perhaps it's daughter number 2 of the first set who's younger than her older sister. O gidolos shebigtanos, she kitana mikitanos shebigdolos. So kulon asuros. So we'll say Divrei Meir. Meir says all the daughters are asura. In other words, the 3 youngest are all asur misafek except for the oldest one, right? Because the oldest can't be called the youngest under any circumstances. It's incredible. Divrei Meir. Rabbi Yossi says no. Kulan mutaros chutz minak tana shebektanos. Well, Rabbi Yossi says all of them are mutar except ultimately again except the youngest daughter number 4. So we'll say what you still hear in the Mishnah, the fundamental Malusin Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. Do people make ambiguous statements? That's the machlokes. Rabbi Meir says, absolutely people make ambiguous statements, and therefore Rabbi Meir in both of these cases, 3 out of the 4 daughters are going to be asur. Only the one who is clearly excluded will not be asur. According to Rabbi Yossi, people don't make ambiguous statements, and therefore again, in case number 1, only the oldest daughter is asur. In case number 2, only the youngest daughter is asur. So the Gemara says, hakitanos bichlal. So we'll say, interestingly enough, going back to the first case of the Mishnah, right? A father is Mekadesh's daughter, but ultimately, again, so what happens? But he doesn't remember who. The Bogros are not included, but the Kitanos are. So we'll say, what that sounds like, all of the Kitanos are going to be Asuros. The Gemara says, Shamas Mina, Kiddushin She'in Mesurin Labiyah, Havu Kiddushin. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that halacha l'maisa. Remember again, I will say this goes back to a previous subject that we had of Kiddushin Shemisrun Biyah. That what's the status of a Kiddushin that cannot result in Biyah? So for example, in this case over here, where a man is Mekadesh his daughter, he doesn't know which one, right? Therefore, again, I will say all of them should be Asura to the husband because he can't have Biyah with any of them because one of them may be what? The sister of his wife. But yet we're seeing they're all Safek Kiddushin. So you see from here that ultimately, again, even Kiddushin Shein V'Surin L'Biyah is Safek Kiddushin. Hachamayaskino, we'll have to stop with this. Hachamayaskino, Kishein Sham Ela Gidola Ukitana. But in the case only there's two daughters. One Gidola, one Kitana. So the Gemara says, Vaha Bogros Katani. But it says Bogros in the plural, which makes it sound like there's also multiple Kitanos. Bogros Da'alma. Ultimately, it's not Bogros in general. So in reality, there's only two daughters over here, one Kitana, one Bogeres. The Mishnah teaching me that the Kiddushin doesn't apply to the Bogeres, applies to the Kitana. We'll stop over for today. Sorry for the speed. We'll pick up and answer this tomorrow. Shkoyach.